Welcome to the garden question and answer video that Steph and I do every Sunday. Steph typically looks through all your questions and writes them down for me to go through. We've had, this one is actually being filmed the day before it goes up. We've been filming this kind of well out in advance, so they're probably closer to when you asked the question now than they were before. We're still on the road, and I'm actually in a ponderosa forest a little west of Flagstaff. Interesting thing, I think this is the largest ponderosa forest of them all. But notice, well, you won't probably be able to notice all that well in just in this little piece of video. They're all kind of the same height. This is not how these forests would have been originally found. They would have been very different sized trees. They would have had fire go through them occasionally. There were wandering herds of bison and elk and sheep and other things that would have come through here. When European settlers first got here, they started with cows and, putting herds of cows in these spaces, and they ate the grass to nothing because the herd didn't move. It stayed in the same place. And now the fires actually killed the trees. In the past, they didn't kill the trees. The grass was, the different heights of the trees, the different ages of the trees allowed some survival. And so there was different sized trees in these forests. But it's kind of interesting to go in one of these forests now, and they're all the same. And unfortunately now when fire comes through, it's extremely damaging. We've seen that across a lot of the West in our travels over the years. Now the trees, because of the way the grass was, we overprotected the forest a little bit from fire, and then also eating the grass, down to nothing. Weirdly ends up changing the way in which the grass grows and the way the trees respond to the fire and that kind of thing. And then just younger trees aren't able to survive it as well because they were logged in the past. So just an interesting observation. You'll see all the trees are like the same size, which, in a forest you wouldn't typically see. Videos that have gone up recently, they're kind of all over the place. This next week you'll see one from Janie's when we visited Dig, Plant, Water, Repeat, camped in their driveway. She's already put up the video from that we filmed with her. I'm just had several other videos we hadn't edited yet that were up ahead of that, so that'll be this coming week. We put up a couple videos with Matt and Tim at Buckholtz, one on conifers and one on Japanese maples. I thought both of those videos were pretty good. They haven't been watched as much as normal, but I guess, the road videos don't get watched quite as much as some of our home content does. Maybe a little bit of weird lighting here in this forest this morning. Let's see. We're going to jump into some questions. Thank you guys for following along with our travels. The channel will be in Dallas I got to do a talk on for a Japanese maple group, and then we're headed over to Alabama, and then we'll be home. We'll be back in the home garden. We'll see what that looks like coming up really soon. You'll see videos from that. Okay. Oh, somebody said, one of the first thing that was written down here is somebody said that they saw me walking across the parking lot in Milwaukee, Oregon. Milwaukee is not Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Oregon, which is like a suburb of Portland, basically. It's a neat little town that's next to it. We've been through there a couple of times. We typically stay, the nurseries that we filmed at, a video that will have not seen yet that will be coming up this week was at Schmidt Nursery on trees. Really fun video we did there. But we filmed at Schmidt, and we filmed at Buckholtz, and we filmed at Isley. And we stay in that Boring, Oregon area, which Milwaukee's fairly close to that. Milwaukee's kind of between Boring and Portland. So anyway, somebody said they saw us in a parking lot. Make sure you say hello if you do see us out wherever. We're happy to meet folks in areas. It's always funny. I'll put up an Instagram post from near Fresno, and somebody says, "We watch you from Fresno," and I'll put up one from Portland, and somebody, it's amazing how broad this audience is over the different areas of the country. So it's kind of fun to run into someone out in 2,000 miles from home, 2,500 miles from home, or whatever. Okay, somebody has a Dawn Redwood. It's 8 feet from the house. They planted before they became a viewer of the channel, and now I've shown a few Dawn Redwoods with some real size on them. It's 12 foot tall now. They fear it will have root issues near the foundation. any issues with continually keeping it small. I'm guessing you can trim it and try to maybe top it. I don't know if I've ever seen one topped before. I have no idea how they respond. Some conifers, like these pines that we're in right here, some pines will tolerate it and some pines won't. And then, you know, that's kind of all over the place. I have no idea about how to keep, you know, how. I think a dawn redwood 8 foot from the house is too close. I mean, I just think that, you know, sometimes it's that plant, you know, I had roots on mine that were this big around at the old house that ran as far out as you could seek. You know, there were roots everywhere from that plant. So you know, I think this one's probably one of those where sooner than later you might want to make a decision on this tree. I mean, this is a tree that gets 70 feet tall and has roots this big around. So, you know, even if you're trying to bonsai it in some way or try to keep it smaller in some way, it could have a negative consequence in the future. You know, bad news with Jim was what I should call this. Second question, this person was dividing hosta and they saw some white and purplish fungi with what looks like styrofoam, which could be perlite, obviously, if you had planted these hosta in the last few years and somehow they were grown in a container, the grower may have used some sort of perlite. So it could be something as simple as perlite we were looking at here, but had little round styrofoam looking balls and then fibrous little white roots everywhere. Is it benign or beneficial? It sounds like it's like mycorrhizal, which is beneficial, some sort of fungi, beneficial fungi that is attached to the roots on these. When you start, if you've been taking care of your soil, you know, use the wood chips to start your garden or keep mulch on top, keep the moisture kind of even. When you pull the mulch back, you should be seeing white, fibrous root-looking material under it. You know, that's some sort of beneficial fungi. There's several different types, but hopefully that's what you were seeing when you were pulling those out. I doubt it was something that was harmful, especially if the hosta looked like they were in pretty good shape early on. Again, I'm getting a question and I have no idea. Literally, it could just be some perlite that was originally in the planting mix that you're digging back up out of the ground. But it sounds like it's a beneficial fungi, which is good. It means your soil is working. This person had pine trees removed several years ago and the roots have decayed and now they're leaving large holes. This is a danger if you do. So I moved into that old house and immediately had Hurricane Fran hit and I lost 100 trees in that lot that were maybe 4-inch caliper or bigger. A lot of them fell over by the roots and so those stumps were gone and it was regraded, but some just snapped off and they were cut to the ground. And it can take sometimes, depending on where you live in the country, if you live in a wet, moist, humid area like Florida, you know, those stumps may break down pretty quickly. And fungi and other things are going to come along and help break that stuff down pretty quickly. Or in the West, where you can walk through, you know, you can walk through the redwood forest or walk through the giant sequoias at Sequoia National Park, and you're basically in somewhat of a desert with these giant trees growing, and they fell down 300 years ago and they're still laying there. So it can be a difference in how things break down depending on where you are in the country for sure. But so for me in Raleigh, those trees over about a 10, 12 year period of time, those stumps rotted and then they become a really big hazard in your garden. You hope that they kind of sink and you see it happening, then it's not dangerous, but they can disappear under the ground and just become a place where you're walking along and all of a sudden you're knee deep in a hole. And so, you know, with a medical emergency of some kind, or you're throwing frisbee and you fall in a hole like that. That's how they were at my old house. Just the occasional, oh, watch your step. They want to know what to do to fill those in. It's always best if you can to kind of fan dirt in from around it and use your own soil as much as possible. But when you have voids like this, at some point you're probably going to have to do some sort of topsoil related thing. If you can dig material in your own garden and figure out how to put it in that hole, I think that's the best thing, because I don't want to bring in, I would prefer not to bring things in if I could. I definitely don't want to fill it with a bunch of organic material because it'll create a big wet space. Like I wouldn't fill it with peat moss or potting soil or, you know, something that's labeled as potting soil, anything like that. It's just going to create a weird wet pocket. And it's just also going to be really weirdly spongy and that kind of thing in that space. So I'd fill it with soil if you can on your own property or something close by. If you order something from somewhere else, which sometimes you have to, you could be introducing weed seeds and other things into disease issues, those kinds of things. So if you can, try to fan it. You know, I don't know how big of a hole this is from the same area, get that filled in a bit, and then figure out if there's another space in your garden that you could lower a little bit and use that soil. That's the best case scenario. I just don't like to bring in a lot of topsoil from other places. They use machine to fluff it up, and then they might mix a little bit of compost in it, and it looks really good when it arrives. But you may have a place in your area that has just fantastic soil that can be brought in. My experience with buying topsoil over the years has been it looks like this beautiful material when it lands when they drop it out of the truck. But if you don't move it immediately, it becomes hard to it almost rehardens back into the brick-like material that it was before they ran it through a machine that fluffed it up and made it look good. Okay. This person has a 300-year-old live oak landscape in Pensacola, Florida. This year they have tons of acorns. Why? Is it related to last year's snow? Well, I guess anything is possible that it could be related to the cold that you had last winter. But we are having a mast year in Raleigh. We got off the phone with a friend yesterday who was just getting a report from our garden and his garden in Raleigh, and he said the acorns are just unbelievable this year. And so you get what are called mast years. Trees will do this basically as a survival mechanism. Imagine if a tree dropped the same amount of acorns every single year, then you'd get the exact same amount of deer and squirrels and other things that take advantage of those acorns, and they would eat almost every one of them. And so as a survival strategy, these trees figured out, well, every 7th year or 3rd year or 9th year or whatever, they'll just do 5 times more than normal. And that way there's no amount of squirrels and deer and everything that could actually eat all those seeds. So you are likely having a mast year. Whether that mast year was created by some sort of weather event or changing thing, or is it just timed, you know, every certain amount of years, I don't really know. But it sounds like we're having a mast year in Raleigh. And we've seen that. We were camped somewhere a few weeks back, and we were under an oak, and it was just we were getting pelted, by acorns. So it appears to be a lot of that across the country. This deciduous sun-loving shrubs planted in 8+ hours of summer sun, 3 to 4 hours of fall sun is the critical metric for sunlight based on summer hours. Okay, in zone 8A. Yeah, for sure. When the sun is at its highest angle, that's when damage is going to occur to shade-loving things, for sure. So if you're, or if things that need sun, that's going to be the time of year when they're putting on their growth. So it's going to be spring and early summer that they're going to need definite full sun in order to take advantage of the full sun loving things. But yeah, I would say that the period of time between, May 15th and August 15th is probably the time that you would be measuring, full sun in your garden. Probably doesn't matter. By now, we're filming this. I'm filming this the first day of November, and the sun is already on a fairly low angle across the sky. So even in areas that you're going to get full sun, it's not going to be as intense as it was, and the plants aren't growing anyway. So if it needs full sun, you need to have full sun on it when it's actively growing. Let's see, especially deciduous sun-loving things, because it won't matter when they lose their leaves in the winter. It won't matter if they're back in the shade somewhat at that point. This person is planning on having Roman candle privacy screen. So Roman candle podocarpus, we showed that in the video that Janie put on her channel on Dig Plant Water Repeat. We talked about Roman candle podocarpus, and of course a couple times on our channel we have a couple of them in our garden. It's a little slower growing than other podocarpus, so it may take a little while for you to create your screen, but it will be beautiful once it gets there. So ultimately this is going to be a part shade space. Currently it's going to be a very sunny space. If they're picking things to plant around it, should they pick sun or shade things? Yeah, this is a question I get, and I've talked about this in the past. If it's full sun the day you're planting, it's full sun. Doesn't matter what it's going to be 5 years from now. You need to put things in that can tolerate the space. In the meantime, the space will evolve in the future. And when it evolves in the future, those plants will either figure it out or you'll have to replace them, maybe transplant them into more sun and put something in there that requires more shade. But unfortunately, things that like the shade are not going to get well established under this, around those in full sun. They're just probably not going, it's probably not going to happen. This person wants to incorporate native perennials into their landscape, but they're concerned about some having a bully nature, and that's true. Some portion of our native perennials are definitely, can be bullies in the garden for sure. You would want to avoid, if you're concerned about this, some Solidagos can get to running. Mountain mint can definitely run all over the place. Monarda or bee balm, some of the bee balms can just really, can take over some space. Joe Pye weed, some Helianthus can really take over some space. Sometimes Amsonia can as well. So there's some that are just really on that list of can take over the space, but they want the native perennials that maybe don't run as much. So things like Echinacea and Rudbeckia, so black-eyed Susans, coneflowers, tend to maybe get bigger in time. If they're straight species, if it's like Echinacea purpurea or something like that, it's just the straight seed, those things can seed around. But most of the named ones that you're gonna find typically are pretty well behaved in the garden. Liatris tends to be fairly well behaved in the garden. Most of the phlox, woodland phlox, upright garden phlox, ground cover phlox will spread, but it's pretty easy to control. Penstemon, yarrow, coreopsis. Some coreopsis can get to moving, but most of them are pretty tame and pretty easy to control if they are. Asclepias tends to stick around. It'll seed itself a little bit, but tends to not be a giant bully in the garden. So there's some choices, and there is a line where, there are some of them. I mean, mountain mint, if it's in the right place with the moisture and that kind of thing, it can really, take off through the garden. Great perennial though, an important perennial for our native pollinators. But I do understand that this the issue with the movement toward more native plants is that people are going to find that some of them are bullies in the garden and become high, a person who wants kind of a low maintenance garden, but they want, to do more natives, are going to want to find that balance, of not, having to control these runaway perennials as much. What is the big cascading tree with the dark foliage in the Buckholtz video? It's also in the video we did at the Bennett Garden and Isley video. That's a weeping purple beech. We all see that tree when we go up to the northeast and all across the north. Always beautiful in the gardens. That one tends to be larger in the landscape. A lot of the weeping trees you have to stake, to get them to whatever height you want. That one tends to be able to add some height on its own. This person is in the Pacific Northwest. They have fastigiate yews. They're 8 feet tall and they completely flop with even a slight rain. They've been pruning the sides to lighten the load a bit. Will they get stronger with time? Anything they can do to help. So I will, I'll take things like sky pencil hollies or fastigiate plum yews or fastigiate regular yews, and I'll take some of the height out of them occasionally to kind of thicken the trunk up a bit down below as I'm adding height. So we would take our sky pencil hollies that I grew in the nursery. They grow rapidly in the nursery and they might add 18 inches pretty quick, but it's a very floppy kind of growth habit to it. And I'd take about half that growth off. Okay, so every time that thing flushes a foot, I'd take 6 inches off, and we just keep doing that over and over. It also puts them back in a growth pattern in a nursery setting where so they grow faster by doing a little bit of pruning on them. So that was always my strategy, and then it allows it to kind of thicken up as it adds height over the years. So that would be my strategy to these. I take a little bit of height out of them and let them thicken up a little bit. I mean, otherwise they're just going to destroy themselves at some point. At some point you're going to get more than just a moderate rain. You're going to get some wind with it and that kind of thing, and they're going to end up destroyed. So for me, I'd take a foot out of them, see if that slowing them down a little bit can allow them to thicken up and become a little more sturdy. I don't know if they're getting enough sun too. That could be problematic as well, because things will stretch and be a little bit more, little less rigid in the shade. So there's this person's in 5B, Illinois. They want to know if they should add fertilizer to the bulbs in hull when planting. Well, everybody that you ever see planting bulbs, well, not everybody, but a lot of them, you're going to see them adding fertilizer to the bottom of the hole. I never have once. Never, ever, ever have I added anything to the bottom of the hole when planting anything. Other people do. That's up to you. The bulb has everything it needs to grow this year, okay? It was when it went to sleep in Holland or wherever, in the Netherlands or wherever it came from, when it went to sleep, it took all that foliage, the energy from that foliage, and put it back into that bulb, and then it was dug and sent to you. It has everything it needs to bloom. So then when it comes up in the spring or late winter and it flowers and then it puts on that foliage is going to grab the sun's energy and rebuild that bulb again for the following year. At that time is when I'm fertilizing. I just fertilize over the top on everything. I don't worry about it while I'm planting. Bulb has everything it needs. If you feel like it helps you, if it feels like it makes you feel good about, that you've done something and you're contributing in some way, and you want to add something to the bottom of the hole, it's nothing against it. It's just, I think it's unnecessary because the bulb has everything it needs. And then I'm going to be fertilizing the entire garden in February anyway, or March, with an organic fertilizer. And the bulb will be rebuilding itself during that time. This person's in Houston, Texas, zone 9A or B. They want to move a 20-year-old Yopon this coming spring. They plan to root prune it now. Is it also a good idea to trim it back a bit now or risk winter damage? So I don't think, so I would definitely be pruning it back some when I ultimately move it. I don't know that you'll need to prune it back when you're root pruning it. You could if you wanted to. I don't think this matters. If you want to root prune it and go ahead and give it a little bit of a trim at that time, that's fine. I'm definitely going to trim it back though when I move it later. So for me, I'm probably going to go out and root prune it, not prune the top on it now. When I go to move it in the late winter, early spring, I am at that time going to do a little bit of pruning on the top of it just to compensate for the root damage. You could do it now if you wanted to, but I don't know if we're just overthinking it at that point. I don't think you're going to get damage on the top so much root pruning at this time of the year because the plant's not really actively growing, so it should be fine. You're not in an abnormally super dry area in Houston either. This person asked, can hydrangeas be grown from seed? Yes, definitely. And that's where all the plant breeding around hydrangeas is, crosses are made, seeds collected, seeds germinated, and then they're observed. They tried quercifolia, which is our native oak leaf hydrangea, and it didn't work. Any suggestions? So, this is one that you can just take the seed directly from the plant and sow, and they come up pretty quickly, but they need to be sitting on the surface of the soil in kind of a shallow tray with light. And some stratification can help. You can put them in the refrigerator for 30 days and something like that, but I have found that they don't need to be stratified. So I just take them directly, but I think the key is to not bury the seed when you do it. Just leave them on the top and keep them moist, but not wet. And then once they've germinated, at that point, you can put them in some sort of kind of part shade space and grow them on from there. But that's been the way I did it in the past with pretty good success. Let's see. Caladiums and tuberous begonias in containers in 7B Chapel Hill. What temp should they be dug and protected? You can let them, man, this is a tricky one because you definitely don't want them to freeze completely, but you can let them die back a little bit from the, from just a light frost, but I definitely don't want a heavy freeze on them. So as soon as these nighttime temperatures are, consistently, or you're hearing on the news, and I saw it on our forecast the other day, just a frost advisory in the Raleigh area. As soon as I hear that, I'm probably going to pull those tuberous begonias and caladiums and not risk going beyond it being tolerant maybe of a light frost, but not tolerant of a real freeze, and go ahead and get them dug and protected. Let's see. This person has a 10-plus-year-old salvia. They think it's raspberry is the variety or the cultivar. It's very woody. They want to cut it back and move it. Will this likely kill it or rejuvenate it? Likely rejuvenate it. The perennials, when we're dealing with herbaceous perennials, I think I've said in the past, obviously annuals are for one season, because the cold's going to kill them or the heat's going to kill them potentially, depending on what type of cool season annuals or warm season annuals you're growing. And then of course, perennials, I feel like every 3 to 5 years, going back to that person digging up hosta to divide them, every 3 to 5 years, you probably need to pop them out of the ground and dig some out and give them to friends, and replant them back in the same place or some other place or whatever. But they tend to really respond well to being dug, divided, replanted, given some extra space, given some extra light, given some extra water. And they really respond well to that. Over time, you'll a lot of times you'll get this kind of first year they do okay, second year, third year, fourth year, they really put on a big show, and then they get kind of tired looking, after 5-6 years in the same space without being dug and divided. And then I think some of our woody shrubs, after about 20 years or so, I can kind of tell how old they are at that point, and they need to either be rejuvenated, pruned, or, replaced potentially. And hopefully trees are going to, outlive us. That's kind of my thoughts on the different types of plants. But yes, you get some benefit from cutting an old shrub back to the ground or digging up a perennial after 3 or 4 or 5 years. And these are 10-year-old, so they've gotten really woody at this point. This person has a Skylands or spruce with deer damage. On the upper branches were eaten, and some of the trunk was damaged as well. We really love that plant. Should they somehow bandage the trunk? Will it look disproportionate as it grows back? Should they save money and try to keep this one or replace it? I don't know. I haven't seen the plant, so this is another one that's difficult to answer. But I will tell you that some of these conifers can recover so slowly, and I don't know that it's ever going to look like it was originally going to look, when you bought it. And so for me, I'm probably going to replace this plant if the damage is more than 50% of the plant in some way. I just think it's going to take so long for this to come back and be what you wanted it to be, and now it could be a super interesting plant. And so maybe I buy another one and put it in this place, and then I take this one that's been bonsai'd by the deer and I keep it and see if it's going to be interesting in the future. That could be a choice as well. This person, because of rocky terrain and an incline, they need to use raised bed. Is a good soil mix created by adding a thick layer of wood chips and some mushroom spores? Yeah, you can definitely add wood chips, in your raised beds. That will be super helpful. You may not need mushroom spores. Mushroom spores tend to be, in the air. But if you want to, you can absolutely do that to fill up some of that gap. A lot of people are filling, tall raised beds like that. You can use limbs and branches and sticks and all kinds of things down at the bottom of that to take up some of that space to save some, money in the future. There's all kinds of different ways, and I'm sure there's lots of videos on YouTube about saving money filling these raised beds. This person asked if Heptacodium is a good plant for a residential landscape, because they've been shown up several times in videos recently, because anytime we go north and around, and you'll see Heptacodium in hotter areas as well, but for the most part, they tend to be crepe myrtles for northern areas, and the crepe myrtle-like growth. But when we go up into the northeast and over to the Pacific Northwest, tons and tons of them. Is it a good residential plant because they heard they sucker? Well, so do crepe myrtles, and so do, a ton of our, Amelanchier, our native serviceberry. Red buds are going to seed themselves all over the place. It's, I think if you're looking for an understory flowering tree, that doesn't take over the space, I think Heptacodium is as good as any. My point being is most things are going to come with something. And if it's just taking a few suckers off the bottom of the plant occasionally, that's minor compared to what some problems can be. Let's see, any experience with skyline holly? This is a weeping Yopon holly. So I think we filmed it in the past at a nursery down in the south, where typically when you get to the southern nurseries, the main holly they're growing is our native Yopon holly. So it's an upright weeping columnar one, or one with a columnar habit, not a weeping habit. There's weeping Yopons as well, but a columnar Yopon holly. Would it be good for a foundation corner with blasting sun? So yeah, typically Yopon hollies are good for part shade conditions. It being a native plant to the southeast, yeah, it's probably going to be a good choice for you for a foundation corner. Let's see. But also I've talked about in the past, if you're putting something on a foundation corner like that's getting it blasted by sun, you may want to underplant it with some sun annuals or something like that for the first few years, just to make sure that the roots just aren't cooking on it. It might not be that the top of the plant's having a problem. It may be that the roots are having a problem. That plant is native to the southeast in an understory woodland space, and so it's probably not used to having its roots just like absolutely cooked in some sort of brown mulch all day long in Houston, Texas. Let's see. The difference between peat moss and coconut coir and their uses. So they're basically a similar material that's used for having consistent moisture available and being sterile, being sterile, kind of neutral materials. The reason peat moss is the main thing used in growing some perennials, for sure, but definitely almost all annuals, is because it typically comes out of the bag in a sterile, it's sterile, so it's not going to introduce disease issues into the greenhouse setting, and it tends to stay fairly consistently moist once you get it wet. And so that combination is good for growers, especially if they're growing in little teeny tiny cells where they're selling you a little vinca plant that's this big. Hanging baskets, it's good to have consistent moisture, especially if you're putting 6 plants in the same hanging basket, not to have moisture on one side of the container and not on the other. Tends to wick water up from the bottom. And so, but peat moss is, dug, it's a mined product basically. There's pine, most of the peat that we use is Canadian peat moss that's literally mined from the ground. So it's stored carbon, so there's a lot of conversation around digging this material up out of the ground and using it. And then some folks have decided that in order to not, use more peat moss that's dug out of the ground, we should use this waste from the coconut industry. But I don't think that that's any more environmentally friendly, because you're taking it from the tropics and you're dehydrating it and you're putting it in a plastic bag and you're shipping it on a ship that runs on diesel fuel or whatever, and shipped it to the country, and then it went into a truck and got driven to the garden center where you bought it from. It doesn't seem any more environmentally friendly. But both have the exact same similar use. They're typically used for some sort of, a place where you're trying to have a neutral material that's good at holding water without keeping things abnormally wet. And when I say neutral material, it's not introducing a bunch of nitrogen or potassium or phosphorus or a lot of other nutrients in, and it allows the grower to really control all the nutrients as well. So it's just always been the perfect material for growers. People are trying to come up with alternatives using compost and other things, you know, for these same uses so that we're not digging the peat up. But again, I stand by my thing that coconut coir is not an environmental solution. And I've had some conversation with some folks who have seen this in production, and these aren't good working conditions either that these folks are in that are sending this coconut coir to us as well. So there's that as well. So last question for this week. Thank you guys so much for participating in these videos. Ask gardening questions in the comment section below the video, and that's where we pick from each week. Your videos helped me through heart surgery and more. Well, awesome. Thank you. Hopefully, wish you all the best. I've got a friend who's about to have a pretty major heart surgery in the next couple of weeks. And so I can imagine your concern around that, and hopefully you're doing well. And thank you for watching the content here on our channel. We really do appreciate it. And again, the person who saw us in the parking lot, you know, in Milwaukee, please say hi. You know, you guys have been, your generosity and, you know, your comments, your generosity, your participation in this channel has allowed us to stand in a ponderosa pine forest in Flagstaff, Arizona, and talk about plants with you guys and be out here botanizing in the woods. So, you know, we appreciate all of it. So thank you so much for that. They had 12 sweet box. They got 12 plants. They're marginal in their area. So they bought these 12 sweet box. They're kind of marginal in their area. Here it is in fall. They bring them home. They flip over the container to pull the plant out, and half the soil falls off. So this can be a fairly common occurrence buying plants, especially when the market for plants is pretty high. You know, if the market's kind of slow for plants, you'll get plants that are root bound. They've been in a pot for too long. Sometimes when things are going really good, some of the nurserymen will get a little ahead shipping things, and they're not holding that root ball together completely. So here we are in the fall. You're buying a plant that's kind of marginal in your area anyway, and now you find out that it's not rooted in the container very well. I think that in zone 6B, 7A, where that sweet box is marginal, I'm going to put them back in the container, and I'm going to probably overwinter them in the container and just go through whatever process that is of taking them in and out through the winter and get some root growth on them in the spring. I think if you double down on losing half the soil off of it and then had a particularly cold winter, you know, I think you're probably going to end up losing some of these plants. So I'm going to keep these in the container and keep them through the winter, and then wait until they're kind of rooted into the pot a little bit better in the early to mid spring. Now, one issue that could happen here is that fertilizer is kind of gone because nurseries tend to use, I've talked about this, the fertilizers are very exacting now. So if I think something's going to take me 9 months to finish it in a container and then get it to the market and get it sold to you, I'm using a 9-month fertilizer. That's how specific these fertilizers are. So I would imagine something sold to you this fall may not have enough fertilizer to last all the way around until May when you replant these, or even June, by the time they're rooted in the containers well. So you might want to add some fertilizer to them. Just a thought on that. Not now, but as they're coming out of March, April, May, sometime in there, you might want to fertilize them a little bit. That may help them get rooted in there a little bit better. One other thought they had here is they could sink the containers in the ground, and that may help. Possibly, but one issue you could potentially have is that if water got into that and they're contained in that container, that loose soil that you created in that container may allow water to settle into the bottom of them, and you may end up with some root rot in it. So if I was going to plant them in the ground to save them, I would actually plant just have them on top of the ground and then bring some leaf litter, leaf mulch, other things, and basically plant them in the container, but the container's still above the ground. I wouldn't sink them into the ground to do that. But so there's a thought on that. So there you go. There is 20 questions. Ask questions down below this video. We'll be back next Sunday with one. Videos upcoming this week. Really great video on trees from Schmidt Nursery. That's been a bucket list nursery for me. It's unbelievable how many trees they've introduced and how many trees they grow in a year. The production, the scale of it's just unbelievable. And then a video again with Janie as well. So thank you guys so much for watching and following along.